After months of debate, the president's health care reform bill is finally up for a vote in the House of Representatives. Pete has just spent an hour covering the president as he urged members to support it. Now, he'll appeal directly to the American people.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just came from the Hill where I talked to the members of Congress there, and I reminded them that opportunities like this come around maybe once in a generation. Most public servants pass through their
Later that night, the House does pass the bill, but by a thin margin. In a month, if the Senate passes its version, Pete's story and the president's may have a dramatic ending. In the evenings, the president is as likely to be following a vote in the Capitol as he is attending a political dinner. And tonight, it's the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Gala. For Pete, it's another 13-hour day.
We can go till 10 o'clock. I am so lucky to be doing this. It's been just a great opportunity to document history. I feel just so fortunate, but it's a grind. This job is a grind. And I'm sure if you talk to other White House staff people, they would say the same thing.
All right, let's go.
Like most White House staff, balancing life outside of work is a challenge.
The thing that's the hardest for me is keeping up with friends. And I'm sure my friends think I've abandoned them, but you know, if you wait, you know, another 3 years, I'll get back to you for sure.
A motorcade has a certain glamour to it, but the realities of security mean that the president and first lady often arrive in some of the least glamorous parts of a building. Still, Pete took one of his most memorable and revealing shots the night of the inauguration on this same freight elevator. These personal pictures reflect the depth of Pete's relationship with the president and first lady.
I'm not sure how I would describe my relationship with the president. So I would say that he would call me a friend, and I would say that our friendship is based more on a professional relationship.
Well, Pete and I are friends at this point. I mean, we know each other. He's seen me on difficult days. He's seen me on happy days. He has gone with us when my family takes trips, and has gotten to know Michelle and the girls. There's nothing that Pete would do that in any way I would be worried about, and I think he feels the same way that I've got his back. And so Pete really does feel like part of the family.
It's that kind of intimacy that allows for memorable images. After his speech at the Hispanic Caucus Gala, the president and Pete are on the final handshakes of a long day.
I don't think he's going to work a rope line, but he might. We're just going to... He's going to do it.
I don't know how he does it. I mean, I have it fairly easy because, okay, all I have to do is follow him and take pictures, and he has to be alert and coherent and articulate and engaged all the time.
Months later, as the holiday season arrives, there's a party atmosphere at the White House. But even as Pete covers the holidays, he follows the president as he reckons with weightier events. His health care bill has run into serious obstacles in the Senate. He faces the most profound economic crisis since the Great Depression. And each day, he must confront the reality of sending young men and women into battle. When the president visited Dover Air Force Base to pay his respects to the families of fallen American soldiers, he left an indelible mark on the president and on Pete.
At one point, the president, only with his military aide and myself, walked on the plane where the caskets were. And I'm going to start getting teary-eyed because that was, you know, something that I had never documented and certainly something that he had never done before. And I could tell that it really affected him in a very emotional way. You know, to me, that was it was a private moment. I wanted to document it for history, but I didn't want to affect the scene for him.
After the holidays, he's battling on all fronts, but his fight for health care reform has been dealt what some consider a fatal blow.
This is a big news because at stake right now, health care reform and a lot of other stuff.
An underdog Republican wins a special election for Senator Kennedy's seat in Massachusetts.
This is very significant for the president and Democrats on so many issues.
Now, Senate Democrats no longer have the supermajority. And that means the president's entire legislative agenda is in serious trouble.
You know, the Massachusetts vote kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think people expected it. So I think it was something that was just not on anybody's radar.
The president's focus now shifts to the upcoming State of the Union speech. He'll talk about the economy, about the wars, and he'll also make one last appeal for health care reform. Pete's coverage of the healthcare saga is about to reach a climactic moment. So he concentrates on getting details that tell the story. One involves preparation for the upcoming speech that the president has been laboring over with speechwriter Jon Favreau.
I think people's favorite pictures is me going over a speech with my speechwriter Jon Favreau and my scrawl all over the place. And it's just a picture of the page. And that's something that you take for granted, but when it's suddenly blown up, you realize that that sends to the public, I think, a sense of what the day-to-day activities of the White House are really like.
Let's go load. We're leaving.
The President of the United States. Here's what I ask Congress, though. Don't walk away from reform. Not now. Not when we are so close. Let us find a way to come together and finish the job for the American people. Let's get it done. Let's get it done.
These defining images, captured at times of great importance, are at the core of why we value presidential photographers. They are there at transformative moments to see and record what we often cannot. But not every president saw the value of this type of coverage, with serious costs to history. President Nixon severely restricted the access of his chief photographer, Ollie Atkins. On the night of his resignation speech to the nation, before the television broadcast began, the president had his ultimate and most revealing exchange with Atkins.
The lights go out. Ollie? No, only the CBS crew now is to be in this room during this. Only the crew. No, there will be no picture. No, after the broadcast. You've taken your picture. Didn't you take one just now? That's it.
The following day, David Hume Kinnerly, who would become President Ford's photographer, caught the moments just after Nixon resigned.
One of the most profound moments I think I've ever photographed was the first frame where he looked up at the White House. Well, I can't imagine what was going through his mind at that moment.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Gerald Ford assumed the presidency at a time when public distrust of the White House ran deep. He chose Kinnerly to be his photographer in part to help open up the White House. Many photographers get close to the president and first family, but David Kinnerly's relationship was unique.
They treated me like a member of the family. I don't know how else to put it. Some of the best pictures I took, for instance, Mrs. Ford looking out of the window in her bathrobe from behind. She looks like she's in a bird cage almost. It was taken when she didn't even know I was in the room. But at the end of every day, President Ford almost always invited me to come up and have a drink, you know, with him and Mrs. Ford, and I was the only one.
The most compelling evidence of Pete's access is hung on the walls of the West Wing. Every couple weeks, Pete and his team bring in new pictures, called jumbos, to keep up with the evolving story of the administration.
I would say changing of the pictures is one of the biggest events that happens around here that everybody loves. There's no question about it.
What do I think of Pete's photos? They're magnificent. Every single day I stop and look at them. He manages to capture the best expressions on people's faces and tells a story.
When Pete changes them, you can't walk through because all the staff is watching and looking for the new pictures. It is amazing.
It's nice for the staff that don't get to spend a lot of FaceTime with the president to sort of see what he does. Did he flip through these?
Sometimes even the president takes a sneak preview of the newest editions.
Sam and I just walked.
He was down here flipping through the photos.
He was
whistling. He's whistling, and he goes, "I love looking at these new jumbos." You know, Pete took a wonderful picture. It's a very simple picture of a little boy who came in with his family. And he was the son of somebody who works at the White House. He couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. And he very boldly told me that people had told him that he and I had the same haircut. And so he wanted to see if that was true. So I put down my head so that he could examine my hair. And he helpfully pointed out all the gray hairs. And then he decided to pat me on the head just to get a feel for it. And Pete took a picture, and I think that one has stayed up through the whole year and a half, just because it reminds you not to take yourself too seriously. If, you know, a 3-year-old can pat you on the head in the Oval Office, then you're probably keeping your sense of humor.
16 months into his term, Pete and his team have made nearly 1 million photographs, 30,000 of the grueling healthcare fight alone. They record the gritty work of building a consensus, the dozens of town hall meetings, and the hundreds of conversations with congressmen and senators. But by late March, after all that, there is still one more vote and a few more pictures that will tell the final story. In the 3 days leading up to the vote, it'll be a full court press to persuade the remaining handful of legislators. Pete will get it all.
I took this job for those last 3 days. You really felt that you were documenting history. I remember the incessant number of phone calls by him, calling individual congressmen. And he used like the Oval Office phone, he used Katie Johnson's phone, and he used Rom's cell phone. You know, it's like in the limo making calls.
By 10 p.m. on the night of the vote, the president has no more calls to make. All he can do is wait.
But then when they started roll call for the vote, he wanted to be with the staff. And everybody had gathered in the Roosevelt room.
At 10:48 p.m., the final tally for the healthcare reform bill is in.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The bill is passed.
I think that's when it really hit people how historic this was. You know, here's something they had worked for basically since day one of his presidency.
After the vote, the president invited his staff up to the White House residence to celebrate.
And we went up on the Truman balcony and toasted all these 25-year-olds and a bunch of people who had worked so hard in relative obscurity to make this thing happen. It was one of those moments that that reminds you of why you got into politics in the first place. The healthcare vote was probably the most gratifying moment that I've had in public life, more than my election as president, because you run and hopefully win elected office, not just for the sake of being something, but for the sake of doing something.
Pete seems to be driven by the same idea.
I feel like I'm the luckiest SOB photographer in the world, and I'm not going to let, you know, these years go by without making the most of it. You know, people always ask me, what's your favorite picture? And I always say it's the one that I'll make tomorrow.
There will be many stories written about the Obama years. But Pete Souza's pictures will give the American public an inner glimpse of what happened here, of what jubilation and defeat felt like, of the texture of days, intense and tranquil, of life in this rarefied place called the White House.